Hello, everyone. My name is Prajakt Raut, and I'm the managing partner of Supply Chain Labs, a venture capital fund that focuses on investing in startups that are disrupting any aspect of supply chain, warehousing, and logistics. I'm also the co founder of Applyifi, which is a platform that helps early stage startups connect with large enterprise customers and mentors them in building a strong foundation for their business. What I'm going to cover today are my perspectives on what it takes to build a strong startup or strong foundation for a startup, and various aspects of what makes a good startup, including what it takes to identify a good idea and how you convert that idea into something that is a market ready product. It's a pleasure to be here and share my perspectives. What I'll cover today are I'll touch upon different topics, right from what it takes to really identify an idea, what are the characteristics of a good idea, what are the importance of a team, and eventually I will end up into sharing some of my perspectives on what it takes to build a strong foundation for a business that will eventually be scalable. Now, you remember that there are no right or wrong answers in building a startup. Everything will be a matter of different people's perspectives. As an entrepreneur as an aspiring entrepreneur, what's important for you is to really understand different people's perspectives, try and get as many perspectives as possible, and then assimilate all those insights and find out what would be, or try and figure out what would be relevant in your context and in your circumstances and with the aspirations and passion that you have. Your solutions will be unique to you, but it will help you become a much, or it'll help you take a much more better informed decision if you were to take perspectives from multiple people. Consider my session today as one of the perspectives that you will get as you build your journey in the entrepreneurial world. Now, let me start by defining what is the difference between a startup and a traditional business. At the core of it, both of these are businesses. When you make a startup, or when you start a startup, or when you do a business as it is traditionally known, both of them fundamentally have a product that you want to sell to a particular customers, and in the process create value for everyone and make money and employ a bunch of people. That's predominantly what a business is. But yet there are differences between the way traditional businesses were run and the way a startup is considered to, or expected to behave. Now, the first important point is a startup is predominantly a tech product or a predominantly tech enabled service. Even if you were doing a traditional business, like, say, for example, creating a chain of restaurants or a chain of cafes, the tech component in planning that entire business, planning the operations of the entire business, will have a tremendous amount of reliance on tech to be considered something of a startup. The second point is that a startup, it typically aspires to reach a massive scale, and therefore fundamentally there has to be a massive scalability possible in the business model that it is constructed, which means how the operations are managed, how the entire processes are designed, what is the use of technology in being able to leverage a variety of resources that are external. All of that make a business model that will be massively scalable. For example, instead of creating your own factory, how can you identify and engage with multiple contract manufacturers, which gives you an infinitely more scalable business model than, say, for example, putting up a factory of your own, which will require a certain amount of resources and capital expenses and so on and so forth. And that is just one example. Every business will have a way in which you can do business traditionally, and nothing wrong with it, and a different way in which you can create a different business model which is massively successful or massively scalable. Both of these can be interesting ideas, both of these can be very powerful ideas, but their approach to how you scale each of these up will be very different. And the scale at which you aspire to do these things could be very different within a traditional business and within a startup related kind of a business. The next point is that startups are obviously very, much younger organizations. They are just starting off. But they are also, even in the larger scheme of things, will be eventually much smaller and much flatter organizations in the way that they are designed, and the entire HR and overall culture of the organization is done. One very, very important component or aspect about a startup is that it is predominantly innovation led, which means that you try to do things differently. The business models are different, the processes are different, the go to market is different. There has to be some innovation or disruption in the way you think about the solutions and the processes underpinning those solutions, so that your chances of success against people who are being traditionally entrenched in the business and could be much larger than you are higher. Innovation always gives you a edge in actually having a better chance at success. And of course, the last point is that venture capital is the predominant source of capital for a lot of startups. Unlike traditional businesses where bank loans and other forms of capital, largely debt, could be the traditional sources of capital for a startup. But at the end of the day, both of these are businesses. Both of these are fundamentally businesses which really need to create value for each stakeholder and make money for the shareholders in that company. And of course, they need to do it responsibly as well. Now, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur who's decided that you want to embark on an entrepreneurial journey, but you don't really have an idea yet, what is the way in which you can identify an idea? Now, any successful entrepreneur will tell you that a good idea has to be rooted in a very, very strongly identified problem statement or an opportunity area. Unless there is a problem statement that has been clearly identified, you cannot create a solution that will address that problem. And that solution eventually will become the idea around which you create your startup. And if the reason why we say India is a fertile ground for creating a lot of entrepreneurs and startups is because if you see around, there are so many problem areas that you will see. There are so many unorganized industries where organizing them will become important, where there are so many aspects about just sheer basic needs about people, where the infrastructure is lacking, where technology, innovation, and a lot of organized services will create a lot of value. So if you look around and identify, yaar, ye aise kyun hai? Why is it not like that? That is a beginning of what could be potentially a solution, which therefore can translate into a startup idea, which eventually becomes a business that has a very strong potential for success in the market. Now, in my observation, when entrepreneurs have built something which is based on their personal experiences, where they have felt the pain or where they have felt the frustration of having gone through that personal thing, or having gone through that pain point personally, and when they go out and build that solution, there is a lot more commitment that they're able to bring to the table, because they see this as a solution that will benefit themselves as well. And commitment, conviction, tenacity, all of these things are important, because the journey is always going to be tough. And in a tough journey, if you have something that is emotionally connecting you to that problem statement, your willingness to really dedicate time to solving it will become that much more stronger. Passion and interest in an area in which you identify the opportunity obviously allows you to bring in a lot more tenacity, which means it will give you the ability to really go at it even in the face of challenges. And people who are able to manage the initial, pass through the initial sets of challenges, no matter how challenging they would be or how frustrating they would be, eventually end up stronger and eventually end up more successful. And of course, understanding of the domain deeply helps in bringing a conviction and actually building the capabilities and the capacities that you would require in creating a business that addresses that problem statement. Now, you may or may not necessarily have any understanding of that business, and it's okay to start really thinking about a business in an area that you have no idea about. But it is extremely important, in which case, to really go out and meet a lot of people, go and talk to people who are from that industry and domain, and then to be able to give them or to understand from them all the nuances that will help you get a much deeper understanding. And that allows you to really understand all the complexities that you will need to address in creating that startup. Now, there are some, again, these are observations and these are not rules. There will always be exceptions to prove the rule. But this, in my view, are a few characteristics that I have seen in what is in companies that have become or startups that have become successful. One, the potential for scale has to be very large, which means that if it needs, especially if you're looking at venture capital funding at some stage for the startup, you need to identify a market where it is extremely large and there is a possibility for you to really create a massive business. It may take 5 years, it may take 10 years to get to that scale, it may take maybe lesser, it may take more, but there has to be a potential for at least creating a massive business. Secondly, areas in which there is much less competition, which are less contested in that sense, give you a much easier option or a much easier path to at least building a foundation before more and more competition comes in. First mover advantage, as they say. It may not be first, but even if it is an early mover advantage, which means there could be very few people that have actually stepped up to create those businesses, that is an ideal space to be in versus something in which there is already a lot of competition. Any other 67 say player in that industry, there's always going to be challenging to create your niche within that. Uniqueness of approach is extremely important. Whether the product is unique, whether your business model is unique, whether your pricing model is unique. For example, a lot of new emerging FMCG brands, when they created and they found that the traditional distribution channels were not really geared to service them, what did they do? They created a very different approach, which is direct to consumer approach, where online marketing and using online platforms like logistics platforms and online e-commerce platforms, they were able to create strong brands for themselves. Any business, whether it is a startup or a traditional business, obviously needs to have a healthy business case, which means there has to be a price point and which is practical enough for consumers to pay, and the costs that are underpinning that entire business are have to be lesser at scale. Even if so be at scale, the cost have to be lesser than what your selling price would be, and therefore there has to be a potential to make money. Without the ability to make money or without the possibility of making money, there is no point in having a startup or any other business for that matter. Now, granted that in the initial phases that your overall cost may be a lot higher and there may be some losses for the initial phases, but in your business plan, if you think about the mid to the long term, there has to be a possibility of at a particular scale, your overall costs are lower than the total revenues that your business makes, which is makes a strong, healthy business case. And you also have to then think of it practically from your own circumstances, from your own resources, and your own capabilities to and competencies to execute it. For example, saying that look, I'll create a spaceship that will rival the some of the best brands in the world. That's a great idea, and you might eventually be able to do it. But if you're a 19 or 20 or 21-year-old without the resources and the competencies and the experiences of understanding to build that, it might be a lot more challenging assignment than, say, for example, for somebody who might become with 20, 25, 30 years of experience in space programs for that matter. So when you think about ideas, you have to think in terms of your context and what is practical. And you also have to think practical in terms of your own talent and the resources that you will be able to put together for that particular project. Now, all of these, some will be external factors and some will be internal factors. A combination of all of these working together harmoniously is what really gives a or what really gives us a startup a strong chance at being a successful startup. Now, all of these, there are no guarantees in business, right? Just because you put all of these things together, tick, 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 all of these boxes are ticked, etc., does not necessarily mean that all of that will work out extremely, in the way you thought it to be. Business plans never go according to the way you have planned it. And therefore, no matter how much you plan, you have to go out in that market and validate some of the assumptions that you would have done in thinking about this. Theoretically, something that might look fine might not really stand out the test of time or test in the or well may not succeed in the market as well as you have thought it to be. And therefore, at the very least, what is important for you is to mitigate the risk. I'll take a slight steps aside on this. A lot of people think that entrepreneurship is about taking a risk. Entrepreneurship is not about taking a risk. It's not, entrepreneurs are not risk takers. Good entrepreneurs are risk mitigators, which means they understand the risk and they do everything in their control or in what is possible for them to do to really take steps to mitigate the risks at each stage, and therefore create a much smoother path than it would otherwise be without that kind of planning. So therefore, validating all your assumptions and ideas that you have, asking customers is most important, in the sense you have identified a problem statement and you have designed a product or are designing a product or are planning to design a product that will address that problem statement. Very important to go and ask a representative of your potential target customers, whether they feel that the problem statement is large enough for them to take action, and if this kind of a solution was available, will they use it, and will they use it, and how much will they pay for it? Now, when you start getting positive reinforcement from customers saying, oh, okay, this is interesting, if you really create this, we will use it, that's one validation. Similarly, you have to do validation with all the other stakeholders as well: distributors, marketeers, support services, and everybody else who might be relevant in the context of your business. Second, it is important to validate the business case. You have to test the viability of that in terms of what is the possible pricing, how much a customer is willing to pay, what are the costs, which are the direct costs which are related to that product, and the indirect costs that you will incur in really delivering that product, and what would be the overheads in really managing the back-end operations and the corporate office and stuff. And as a result, at what scale does your business start making money at a unit level, and at what scale does the business start making unit at an overall level, and what would be a path from here to that, to becoming profitable? That in essence is what a business plan is about, but it is important for you to make that. And after you have done all of these assumptions in media business plan, go back and validate these assumptions. For example, if you say that, look, if I approach 10 customers, 5 of them will do a pilot and 2 of them will eventually become customers. Now, these are assumptions. You don't know whether that will be true or not. So when you go to 10 customers, maybe 8 customers do a pilot, but only 1 of them actually become a customer, or maybe 4 of them actually become do a pilot instead of 5, and 3 of them actually become customers, or nobody becomes a customer. But it is important for you to really then try and figure out what is working and what is not working. If, for example, you don't get a response from customers according to what you had expected, don't throw the baby with the bathwater, so to say, and say, nahi, nahi, ye to nahi chalega. Understand whether customers where the problem is. Is it that they are not understanding what you are communicating? Or is it that they're saying, Samajh aaya, but I still don't want the product? Or they're saying that, look, I want the product, but not at this price point. Or I want the product, I want at this price point, but not right now. All of these things will have to be factored in as you start validating your assumptions, to then really figure out where the adjustments need to get made so that you improve the chances of your success. And despite doing all of this planning, again, you then have to do a small pilot, what is called an MVP in the startup circles, which is minimum viable product. Take a small market, take a minimum viable product, which is the base version of your product, and test it and see what the response is. And this you have to keep on doing again and again and again and again, which means that at every stage, all the assumptions that you will take in going from point A to point B will have to be validated. Not have to be validated, but if you validate it, the chances of you making mistake and spending money on those mistakes will reduce significantly. Now, one of the important factors of a startup is the quality of the founding team. Nothing in a startup is more important than that, because, no matter how good the idea, no matter how good the business case, no matter how much customers want it, no matter how good the product is, everything aside, if you don't have a founding team that gels together and is clear about what they want to do and really are working as a team, eventually the startup will not succeed because there will be infighting, people will be pulling in a different directions and stuff. So it's extremely important that you have a team that is very well aligned. What does alignment mean? That means you need to understand what is it that you're building, because if you're not clear on the what part, the how part and when part and how much part is really not going to be important at all. So very, very clear, it is to be very, very clear that all the 1, 2, 3, 4, how many, whatever number of founders there are, they are very clear in terms of why we are doing this and what is it that we are doing. You also have to be very clear on what the end goals are. Are you building a 10 crore company? Are you building a 100 crore company? Are you building a 10,000 crore company in say 5 years time, 10 years time? What do the numbers look like? Because say, for example, even if you are clear on the what, but if you haven't decided in 10 years time what your aspiration is, maybe one person wants to build a 2000 crore company and maybe one person wants to build a 200 crore company. But if you don't discuss this, you will not know where the gaps are, and then you will not be able to convert, because it is extremely important that all the founders are working not only on the same what, but also on the same direction and the milestones, because those would be important to meet. If you don't know what your milestones are, then it is obviously going to be very difficult to meet them. It is also important to have an alignment on the effort, sacrifices, and the emotional investment that you will need to do. You have to understand a founding team is somebody who's equally invested into the business. Yes, some people may be able to put in more money, some people may be able to put in more hours into that business, but a founding team is really somebody who are equally passionate about what you're building. You have to have an alignment on the contribution. Alignment does not mean that everybody has to come in an equal level, but how much is somebody going to put? And it could be zero. Center look यार मैं तो काम कर सकता हूँ but मेरे पास पैसे नहीं है डालने के लिए. No problem. As long as all three of you, four of you, or two of you, whoever are getting together, are clear in terms of what I can put, what you can put in terms of money, what you can put in terms of hours, and what I can put in terms of hours. And therefore, then you can decide in terms of how the share of profits or the share in the company, how much equity each one will have, etc., etc. All of those can get decided. And again, I'm repeating, alignment does not necessarily mean equal contribution. Alignment necessarily means all of you being very clear about who's contributing how much. A good founding team also usually has complementarity of skills and temperament. What I mean by that is somebody from the tech background, somebody from a domain expertise, somebody from sales and marketing, etc., etc. That makes a good team, because then each one of you takes very different uh, uh, aspects that are critical to the business, and then create something that will be valuable. Now, is it absolutely important? Well, it's nice to have, but not always will you find a founding team with all those complementary skills that would be required. In which case, it's important to then figure out who are the other people that you can get in, either as advisors or people who can come in into the initial team members, etc. There are various sources of capital that can get that a startup can. Initially, it is important to what is called bootstrapping, which is do as frugally as possible and do it with your own capital. Maybe you've taken some money from your parents or your friends and stuff, but really do it in at least the validating of the problem, thinking about the solutions and stuff. You can also do it part time while you're doing something else to really create money for yourself. All of that is essentially called bootstrapping. And no matter how much capital is externally available or possible for you to get, the best form of capital is always payments from customers, whether they pay you in advance or whether they pay you after you've delivered the product or service. That is the most valuable form of capital that your company can ever get, because it happens without any diluting of stake. It happens without having any risks underpinning it, and you have to deliver a good product. But that's it. It's the most powerful one. But in today's environment, there are lots of ways in which people raise money. There is a what is called a family and friends round, where you will be able to construct a small capital raising or funding round, which can be structured, and there are ways in which you can do it. We can have an entirely different session on that. There are angel investors, accelerators, incubators. In fact, a lot of education institutions, etc., will have accelerators and incubators. There are a lot of large companies which could be relevant in your industry that are doing their own incubation programs or innovation programs that could be a useful source for you to get started and get initial capital. Lots of state governments and central governments and lots of PSUs are creating grants for, and different industry bodies are creating grants for fostering innovation in an area of their area of interest. And of course, there are lots of other business plan competitions. Lastly, there is also venture capital or angel investor networks, etc. But those will come slightly later on after you've already got something going. Very unlikely that investors will come in and start putting money into your business at a concept or a pilot stage. And I'm going to end my perspectives on this by saying that, look, these are the, in my view, 10 areas in which you need to build a very, very strong foundation for scale. You need to have a very focused value proposition. What does that mean? That no matter, even if your product has 10 different features, you have to, your brand positioning can be built only on one feature or one aspect about your business. And we can talk about that in detail in a further session. But it is usually going to be tough for customers to remember, or potential clients to remember all the 8, 10 features that your product has. But if you have a strong value proposition, which is very focused, people understand and remember you for that. And counterintuitive as it may seem, telling people about one feature and building a business around that, while the other features can be experienced by people, is a lot more powerful than saying I do this plus this plus this plus this plus this, because it is very then hard for people to remember and get a feel of what you will be doing. Much like that, the second point, which is it's very, very important to identify a core target segment, which is no matter how many customer segments that your product will be relevant for, at least for the first 2, 3 years, identify a niche core target segment, very small target segment, and start delivering great value onto that. As you start building a foundation on that, you can start expanding if required. And if your core target segment identified is large enough, it usually gives you a focused approach to going around that as well. And likewise, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but each one of these points, but I'll just highlight one or two that I think are important. Find inexpensive markets to launch in. A lot of times I see entrepreneurs making or not making, I won't call it a mistake, but getting tempted to launch in the biggest market possible: Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, etc., etc. This is because you feel that those would be large markets. Yes, they would be large markets potentially, and maybe these would be eventually your important markets. But when you're doing your first steps, do you really need to target that? Instead of launching in Chennai, can you launch in Madurai? Instead of launching in Gurgaon, can you launch in Alwar? Instead of launching in Bombay, can you launch in, say, an Aurangabad? Those will be cheaper markets to do. They will be fairly lesser contested, which means a limited amount of capital that you will have in the initial phases can really go a long way and help you build a stronger foundation on. I also tell people to make a very, very detailed business plan, which takes into account all the aspects and all the uh, expenses that you will have at real cost levels. I'm at a fully loaded cost level, which means that you may not be taking a salary, your friend may be helping with marketing, your uncle may have given an office, but don't make your business plans assuming those benefits. Put a price to all of that. If your friend had charged, if your uncle had actually rented this office, what would it be? Now, what, and the savings that you have because somebody is giving you some help is a cash flow saving, but it is not a business plan saving. So when you work your business plan, work on a fully loaded level. I'm going to leave this as a snapshot of what you might want to put together, because this, with all the planning that you will do, if you are able to articulate all these things in really a very sharp um slide, so to say, or a one page definition. It also gives you a very clear view on where you are and where you want to go. The 10 things that I've listed as aspects of the business on the left hand side are things that you need to identify who are the people who are going to be taking ownership for that. It could be one of the founders. It doesn't mean that you have to be an expert on that, but you're taking the ownership for bringing in relevant experts and so on and so forth for making that business successful. Because whether you have the competencies or no, these 10 things are going to be required, and somebody has to really get that done internally or externally. Okay. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but essentially, this is a view of what kind of detailing you require, and row by row level different kinds of cost structures and revenue structures to really work out a business plan that is comprehensive and that gives you a view of where potentially your business can go. Hmm? I'm also going to leave this as a slide for you to look at on what typically a investor pitch deck covers, which are kind of what are the kind of information that investors seek before they can take a view in terms of whether they want to even consider investing into your business or not. Okay. And most importantly, irrespective of all of this planning, this and that, etc., see, there will be ups and downs in business, no matter at what stage. Even when you are a massively successful company, and hopefully you will be someday, there are going to be ups and downs. And it's therefore important to find a business in an area that you are very passionate about and that gives you joy. It is very, very important that you enjoy the journey in and enjoy going to office, enjoy the colleagues that you work with, etc., because that's the joy of entrepreneurship. I wish you all the best in your entrepreneurial journey. And if somebody were to reach out to me, these are my mail IDs. Feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.